If you were standing in front of a burning building and there was a child trapped in one room and a Picasso in the other room, and this philosopher said, yeah, I would save the Picasso.
Well, who was that?
They are just merrily going along with their calculations, making choices about who gets to live and who dies. This drug, one dose of it, will just stop this disease in its tracks, will cure this condition. But the company behind it, Novartis, has charged £1.7 million for this drug. It does feel like you're holding these babies to ransom, basically.
You have to be something of a psychopath.
It's just that the Silicon Valley billionaires who are taking this philosophy on, it turns everything into a kind of computer game, doesn't it? Like, how many lives did you save? How many points have you scored? Which is just incredibly cruel as well. It's a kind of Hunger Games thing. Put your name in and maybe your life will be safe, but maybe not.
Who are we talking about, really? Are we talking about like Jeff Bezos and his mates, Elon Musk? Who are the philanthropic, effective altruist elites who give to some and not others?
Well, there are people, and they're particularly, Silicon Valley billionaires, some of the wealthiest people in the world, who have decided to give their money away according to the principles of effective altruism, which is a philosophy that suggests the best way to do good in the world is to maximize the bang for your buck. So make sure you're saving as many lives as possible with your money. And that means don't give with your heart. Don't give to a charity because it's a cancer charity and your mother died of cancer. Don't be swayed by the leaflet with the puppy on it or the video of, orphans in rubble because of some big disaster. You must try and see where your money can go furthest. And there are some people like the second person ever to be involved in Facebook, who's called Dustin Moskovitz. He used to share a room with Mark Zuckerberg. He has a philanthropic foundation that is giving away $11 billion of his money in his lifetime. And they are using these principles of effective altruism, treating philanthropy and doing good like a science. How are we going to make sure that the money we give away goes furthest?
That's fascinating, because I've always heard effective altruism, and I'm one of those people who didn't actually look up what it really meant. But that does sound like what it's written on the tin, isn't it? Effective altruism.
Yeah.
So are there negatives to this?
Well, it requires you to have a kind of cold-hearted view of doing good. And it requires you to shut your eyes to the emotional appeal of things around you. So when I was going to these foundations in San Francisco to interview the people charged with giving this money away, I was literally stepping over homeless people in crisis, sleeping on the streets of San Francisco. According to the principles of effective altruism, homeless people, drug addicts, people in mental health crisis represent poor investments, poor philanthropic investments, because you can save many more lives if you give money to pay for mosquito nets in Africa or deworming tablets in Africa. And so it's a mindset that requires you to shut your eyes and ears to the world around you as you see it and just look at cold, hard data. And it also means that you're prepared to ask really, some would say, distasteful questions like, okay, I've got this money to give away. Who should I save? At what point in someone's life should I intervene? Is it worse if a newborn dies or if a mother of children dies? And there are people in the effective altruism movement who have really thought about this. And I listened to a podcast of one guy who had come up with this formula. He plotted it on a graph and had determined the worst age to die is 8 years old, because by the time you're 8, you have many lives, many years ahead of you, but you've also made meaningful connections in your life, which means your death would affect other people as well.
Wow.
And it also means you've got to do things like the philosopher who's one of the big names connected to effective altruism was asked in a debate, I think in 2015, this thought experiment was put to him, which was, if you were standing in front of a burning building and there was a child trapped in one room and a Picasso in the other room, your philosophy would mean that you saved the Picasso and not the dying child, because you could save many more dying children if you saved the Picasso. And this philosopher said, yeah, I would save the Picasso.
Well, who was that?
Will MacAskill. He's a very, very successful. He's the youngest professor of philosophy in the world, I think, when he was made a professor at Oxford. He's a very brilliant man. He's written lots of books. But yeah, he is the kind of the father of effective altruism. He's the one who came up with the name effective altruism.
That's extraordinary. So I suppose to really do the most altruistic thing possible, you have to be something of a psychopath.
Well, you have to have a particular kind of mindset, which I don't have. And when I interviewed Will MacAskill, he said, look, witches used to be burnt at the stake. In the beginning of the scientific method, people thought they were heretics. And he would see himself as a heretic because he would say, I'm just applying the scientific method to doing good. And yes, you might think that my approach is awful, but I think from his perspective, where I was coming from was kind of primitive and unevolved, and that one day I would kind of catch up.
It's such a weird one, though. I guess I don't think there's a right or wrong with some of this stuff. You'd have to think it's a little bit like I was looking into Immanuel Kant, because that's the kind of thing I do on a daily basis. And his idea of like truth, like you have to always tell the truth no matter what, even if a Nazi guard is at your door saying, are you harboring a Jew up there? Whatever it is, you have to tell the truth. And I read Sam Harris wrote a thing about it called Lying as well, and he also is a truth purist. But then he said to actually do this in real life, you would have to be a psychopath. So you'd like to think that this philosopher, Will MacAskill, would actually save an 8-year-old rather than the Picasso.
Yes, you would like to think that. And you'd like to think that most of us would, because we're not computational devices for maximizing benefit to the world. That's the whole thing. It's just that the Silicon Valley billionaires who are taking this philosophy on are taking it on as if it really was an instruction manual for life, because it turns everything into a kind of computer game, doesn't it? Like, how many lives did you save? How many points have you scored? And what it realistically means is that all the money is going towards the cheapest lives to save, which are kids in Africa.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Do you get the impression that these elite philanthropic altruists are competing with one another? I always remember this. I've mentioned it a couple of times, but it's one of my favorite Curb Your Enthusiasm moments. Larry David, he donates a wing to a hospital. And it says like, by Larry David. And Ted Danson, his rival, does it on the other side of the hospital, but by anonymous. And then everyone's like, oh, Ted is so lovely. He put it on. There's that kind of competitive altruism. Is that going on?
I think these people would say no, that they're not being competitive about it, that altruism is purely about doing good for others. It's not about, having the highest score of lives saved. But, if you're looking at goodness purely in terms of numbers, you can't help but compare, I'm sure. And, these foundations are all very proud of how much money they're giving away. They do disclose that. So I'm sure there's an element of that.
Who are we talking about, really? Are we talking about like Jeff Bezos and his mates, Elon Musk?
So I think Elon Musk he's been connected to Will MacAskill. I mean, I don't know if you followed the whole business with Sam Bankman-Fried, but when Elon Musk's dealings with Twitter were going through the courts, when he tried to back out of buying Twitter, lots of his texts to Will MacAskill about Sam Bankman-Fried and whether or not he would invest, they would disclose this. He's certainly involved in the movement. Dustin Moskovitz, who is he's the head of Asana at the moment, but he's also got lots of shares in Meta because he was, Mark Zuckerberg's roommate. Bill Gates has also said that he's very interested in effective altruism. And of course, I mean, you can understand why it's a good thing in a way to say, I want my money to not be wasted. I want it to go as far as possible. And there are many charities that are extremely wasteful, that spend lots of money on employees having business class fares from place to place and not necessarily on saving lives. I think most people would want to make sure that when they give money to charity, it goes to helping people the most. It's just when you take it to an extreme that it becomes a bit cold.
A bit inhuman. And Bill Gates has been accused of that. Have you seen, like, the internet hates that guy? I'm going to get shouted at for this, but I don't actually understand why. He seems all right, doesn't he?
Well, I think the internet generally hates, the internet generally hates wealthy people who have done very well and are quite nerdy, but that's not true at all, because there's Elon Musk that the internet generally loves, don't they?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's interesting. I wonder what that's about. They think that Bill Gates is trying to do all the stuff with the vaccines, and I don't know what.
Microchip people.
Tom Hanks as well. Have you seen that?
No. What, people don't like him?
Yeah, I won't go into it, because then it would seem like I'm repeating the stuff about him, but I've just not seen evidence for it at all. It's just like the nicer and wealthier someone is, I think that's when they start to become a target. So let's never become nice or wealthy.
Yeah, no danger of that.
No, we'll never be nice. Who decides what drugs are worth saving people?
Well, in the UK, the NHS has to pay for drugs, and NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, decides which drugs to recommend be available on the NHS. And they are prepared to spend £20,000 to £30,000 a year on, well, they're prepared to spend £20,000 to £30,000 per year of life in good health that a drug or a treatment will give you and me. And they have this number, £20,000 to £30,000 per quality adjusted life year.
Is that per person? Like on
that's
you?
Per person. So if this drug will give you an extra 10 years of life in good health and it costs £300,000, they'll pay for it. If it's £400,000 for those extra 10 years, they won't pay for it. It's too much, you die. And this number, I was investigating this, and I thought this number must come from, they look at the budgets, they look at the number of people that the NHS has to serve, they do some maths. No, they've plucked this number out of the air, £20,000 to £30,000 a year that they'll spend. It comes from when NICE was first founded in the late 90s. That was how much dialysis costs for a year. And the point is, the number is a kind of token that allows them to compare different drugs for different conditions. So it's hard to compare whether or not a cancer drug would help a gene therapy that would save the life of a child with a rare disease. But if you say we are prepared to spend this amount for each year of life in good health that it gives you, then it allows different treatments to be compared, basically.
So does that mean there might be drugs out there that could save a lot of lives, but we're not putting them forward because they're expensive?
Yes, it does. But then quite often the pharmaceutical companies know that the NHS is prepared to spend £20,000 to £30,000 per quality adjusted life year. So there'll be a little dance between the pharmaceutical companies and NICE when they're deciding how to price these drugs.
Interesting. Do you have concerns about Big Pharma?
I think that because they know that there are certain drugs that people will pay anything for, they will price anything for those drugs. So as part of my reporting, I looked into a gene therapy called Zolgensma, which is for a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, which is like the most cruel disease that you can imagine. Babies are born, the ones that have the most extreme forms of spinal muscular atrophy, and it is the most common genetic condition that babies are born with in this country. You're born with this condition, the baby looks totally fine, and then the baby just stops having control of its muscles very slowly, and then can't breathe, can't swallow, never learns to walk, and after something like 90% of all babies with it will die before the age of 2. This drug, one dose of it, will just stop this disease in its tracks, will cure this condition. But the company behind it, Novartis, has charged £1.7 million for this drug. And so the NHS had to decide whether or not they could supply it, and NICE were doing all of these consultations to see whether or not they would pay for it. And eventually they worked out by looking at lots of different things, including how many quality adjusted life years it would give to a baby. And this is a baby, has the rest of its life ahead of it. They worked out it was cost effective to pay for this drug. So they have paid for this drug. But I think charging £1.7 million for a drug is kind of outrageous. I know you need to incentivize research into rare conditions, but it does feel like you're holding these babies to ransom, basically.
Do you think they knew that there was more of an emotional pull and that they would be able to use that to up the price?
Completely. And if you look at the website of Zolgensma, it's horrible. It's all videos of like babies celebrating their first and second birthdays. It's babies getting up and taking their first steps. They know that parents who have babies who've got this condition will be Googling Zolgensma and will see all of this stuff. And this is stuff they dream to see for their child walking or having a birthday cake, being alive to their second birthday. So they're completely pulling on those levers. And they want patients to be demanding the drug, and they know that they can charge almost anything for it.
Oh, wow. But now people can get that on the NHS.
They can, yes, in the UK. But then, you're just as likely to be born with this condition in many other countries. And in many other countries, you can't get hold of it. I don't know if they still do this, but Novartis used to hold this lottery for children who were living in countries where it wasn't free at the point of delivery, which is just incredibly cruel as well. It's a kind of Hunger Games thing. Put your name in and maybe your life will be safe, but maybe not. Aren't we nice? We're giving away 100 free doses a year. It was really cruel.
Wow. What was that film, The Constant Gardener, about? Was it about something like that?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you got to see that. Oh, when you go home, you got to see that. I mean, I love Ralph Fiennes. I'm like in love with him. He's my sort of man crush. And that was when he was super handsome back in the, do you remember those days?
You really do have a crush on him.
I have you know what? My fiance has a crush on him. And then I started looking and thought, oh, you know what? I love him. like more than any other actor, and especially in The Constant Gardener and The English Patient, that sort of time when he was doing, he had his hair and everything.
But The Constant Gardener is about some people live, some people die.
They go to. It's some. Oh, I wish I remembered the actual thing. His wife was looking into something. She gets killed, we think, at the beginning, and he goes and because he's not that interested in all this stuff, but she was researching all this stuff in Africa about what drugs go to who, and it's the most gorgeous film. I love that film.
I will check it
emotional
out.
Thinking of the film, how they toy with our emotions, these films. Right, are we approaching then a time, and I know you do a lot of, you're interested in dystopian themes. You've been described as the Margaret Atwood, Louis Theroux. Is that on the book?
So like Louis Theroux channeling Margaret Atwood, or like that was a review of my first book, something like that. Yes.
I like that. Well, okay, I always get the wrong way around. Vegan meat and sex robots and vegan meat was my first book, which I loved as well. So yes, futuristic dystopia. Are we having different? I mean, we already have to an extent, but stratas of society where rich people can just pay for their babies to get these kinds of things, and impoverished people can't.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're living. It goes much further than that. It's not just about drugs. It's also about who gets to have children. At the moment, fertility rates are just in total freefall. You have women are leaving it later and later to have babies, and male sperm counts in the English-speaking world, I think in the Western world in general, they have just completely fallen, something like 50% over the last 50 years. Nobody really knows why.
It's children of men.
It's children of men, yes. And the thing is, because IVF can kind of circumvent the problem, as in, we can get the sperm to meet the egg, there isn't really a lot of research into why this drop in fertility is happening, but it's happening. And at the moment, to have your own biological children, you either have to be lucky, like me, I didn't have problems conceiving, or you have to be very rich. And the richer you are, the more likely you are to be able to have your own biological children, because you can pay for somebody else to carry those children, or you can pay for donor sperm to inseminate your egg, or all these various other different things. And so I am quite worried about, I don't necessarily want to live in a world where only the biologically fortunate or the very wealthy get to reproduce and have their own biological children. That disturbs me.
Wi-Fi causing the lower sperm?
I haven't heard that. I've heard lots of things to do with hormones in the water, plastics, things like that. Gay frogs, all of the rest of it. But I mean, whatever it may be, it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Apparently that was actually one of the things where he was right. Someone told me recently the gay frogs thing, because he was saying that there's hormones that get into the water and it's turning frogs gay. And everyone used that as like the thing that was the maddest thing he said. And he said a lot of mad things. But apparently that one's actually, they are going a bit gay.
Frogs are going a bit gay. I have lots of frogs having sex in my garden right at the moment, so I might have to do a scientific study of what kinds of frogs they are. But yeah, I hadn't heard that before.
See if they're putting together any pride rallies in the garden. So frog pride. No, well, good luck to the frogs. Let them do their thing. Do you ever feel then that humans are just a bit shit? And like, we're good as well. We're good at lots of stuff, but a lot of our conversation is about, I want to help these people and let's all help each other and that kind of thing. But really everything just comes down to money. I mean, writing this book, did you start to feel, oh gosh, we're all just quite money-ish?
We're all quite, well, I started to realise how much things come down to money. And I'm quite an idealistic person. I've made choices in my life where I could have made lots of money and I've chosen not to do it because I wanted to be a good person.
Yeah.
And as I get
older,
that? Well, I don't regret it, because I don't really think I genuinely don't think I could live with myself if I was simply living in pursuit of money. Yeah. I do wish I was a lot better paid, though. I don't think there's anything wrong with money per se. But no, I do think the bottom line is always ultimately money for many things that should come down to kind of ethics and emotions and our judgment. It does come down to what is cost effective and what isn't, which is some people might say that's worrying. Other people would say that's just pragmatic. That's how we judge value, is in terms of money. So, why not reduce everything to that?
If someone said they were going to cut your leg off, like just amputate it and throw it away, or they'll keep your leg, but 1,000 people you don't know in Indonesia are going to just die, what would you do? I
have to say I would probably, this is going to sound really worthy, but I'd probably lose my leg.
Would you?
Yeah,
Wow.
Because I'm really motivated by guilt and pain. And in fact, I think that's what's made me quite a good journalist is whenever I have a bad feeling like, I should let them know in advance that actually the book that I'm writing is called The Price of Life, and I'm going to tell this person who's bereaved because their son was murdered. I'm going to tell this person how much their son's murder cost society. I have a very functional anxiety that means I probably couldn't live with myself if I knew lots of other people had died. And it's been very useful to me as a journalist to have that functional anxiety. But yeah, ultimately that is a form of self-interest, really. It's more that I can't bear the pain of feeling bad rather than, I'm so motivated by love for those that might die. That's really interesting. Like, it's something I've become a bit obsessed by, the idea of altruism, if there's any such thing as altruism. I know it's a really old philosophical debate that university students are having while smoking weed or whatever, but I've just joined that now in my mid-30s. Well, I was going to say, I think with altruism, we don't just help other people to help other people. We help other people to create the world that we want to live in, which is why you don't want to live in a world where you step over the homeless people and say, sorry, your life isn't as worth saving as someone on the other side of the world that I can't see because they're cheaper. You want to live in a world where, well, hopefully you want to live in the world where there aren't homeless people sleeping on your doorstep or any doorstep. And the same goes for lots of things. I mean, I think avoiding, doing things for yourself that also benefit other people could be quite useful. I've learned so much from trying to avoid the bad feeling. Like when I was making documentaries, hating myself in the edit because I'd interrupted someone when they were saying something useful or that I wanted to use that I couldn't use because I'd interrupted them. All of these things are really, really useful feelings of like that horrible pang, and doing things to try and avoid that horrible pang can help other people, but it could also help you too. Yes. The more embarrassed you are by stuff, the more you sort of correct your behavior for the next time. Yeah. I suppose a tribe could only do well if, firstly, there was enough empathy to lift up the people at the bottom of that tribe, because you can't have half your tribe dying. Yeah. But also you want that competitive edge because you want to be better than other people, so you can't have it just... Yeah. You have to have many motivations to behave in a certain way, rather than just being like, I'm going to do what's good for other people. What if you could save your leg and instantly forget that those 1,000 people died? This is a very strange thought experiment. If I could save my leg and, if I could forget, if I wouldn't know about it, if I wouldn't know about it, then I probably would save my leg. Yeah. Horrible, selfish. I think there is no number of people that would die that would lead to me saying, take my leg. I don't think, and even if I remembered it. And I think I'm quite empathetic, but maybe everyone thinks they are. But I get very sad when like dogs... You're very attached to your leg. Yeah, I'm just not losing my leg. I'll just be really sad about what's happened to these people and just go, that's a shame. That's very sad, as I sort of jog around the park and play tennis badly and stuff like that. You wouldn't have pangs of like, oh my God, here I am jogging and there are all these people dead just because I wanted to jog when I could be in a wheelchair and it could all be fine, or I could have a prosthetic leg. I'd feel worse if it was like all of their legs were taken away, so they're suffering. But if they're dead, it's like, okay, well, at least that's finished now. Of course, there's their family that'll be thinking about it and that kind of thing. But I suppose I think I'm reacting against what I've seen as a bit of the sort of woke culture stuff, which is people sort of displaying how much they care about other people. And there's an assumption they care more than I do or more than other people do. And that winds me up because I think we all care in different ways. And empathy is learned anyway, isn't it? If you grew up in slavery times, you'd probably have much less empathy for the average slave than you would nowadays looking at them, because you're different. Well, society. It probably wouldn't occur to you to think of them as fully human, and so you wouldn't have that empathy. But yeah, I do think there is a kind of performative caring that is not altruism and that is not necessary. It's basically kind of a particular kind of PR for yourself. And yeah, for me, it's the sort of opposite. It's about performing for myself, I guess, that I'd be wanting to do the right thing because I couldn't bear it if I didn't, which is a form of selfishness. It's not about how people would see me. I think everything's a form of selfishness, like everything ever. I had this whole argument with a friend recently about determinism and all this stuff, and I don't know. Do you think people are still slaves to an extent? I was in America, I was traveling through Florida. There's lots of Haitians there who grow up in absolute poverty, and then they get to America, they don't speak English. Of course, they're not slaves in the same way. They're not like beaten and abused as slaves in America were a couple hundred years ago, but they don't have like freedom to do it. They've got no money. What can you do? You go to work all day in a cafe and go home. That's not freedom, is it? I think there is a very fine line, if there's a line at all, between very low paid work and slavery. And in reporting my latest book, I went and had a pedicure as part of the reporting because I was looking at slavery and trafficking. And of course, there was a big case in the UK where 35 Vietnamese people were killed. They were in the back of a refrigerated lorry coming over to the UK, and they all suffocated. And many of them were coming over to work in beauty salons. And the place where I get my nails done is a Vietnamese-run beauty salon. And they only take cash, and it's very cheap. I went back there armed with this sort of list of things that various different places, government agencies, charities have said, look out for if you're going to a nail salon to see if the person doing your nails is trafficked. And I couldn't tell. In some respects, they did tick the boxes, but in other respects, they didn't.
What are the boxes there?
The boxes are things like, is there a man at the door that gives other people orders? Is the place always open 7 days a week, very long hours? Do the people not speak English? Do they only take cash? Is hygiene not a priority? Various other things. But actually, I don't think the people who I went to, I don't think they were trafficked because they were kind of talking among themselves. It was the same faces who'd been there for quite a long time. But it was so cheap. It was like £23 for a pedicure. It took 70 minutes in central London. And you think, how can they be making any money at all? You know, if they've got to pay for their energy bills and the premises and all the rest, like it's got to be dodgy. It's really got to be.
Not paying taxes.
Well, yeah, because paid cash. But this is opposite the police station. And you think, how can this be happening? Anyway, I think there are a lot of things that probably could be slavery, like, you know, having a cleaner clean your house and paying them cash as little as possible, paying someone to clean your car as little as possible, or, you know, childcare. People are constantly trying to juggle how to have cheap childcare. And there are lots of things that are a little bit too cheap that people don't question because they are the beneficiary of it. And it's things like, you know, luxuries, things that you would really like you would like to take this Uber, or you would like to have someone else clean your house, but you can't afford to pay the kind of proper market rate of doing everything above board. So you'll do this, it's cheap, and you won't ask too many questions. And they must be benefiting because, you know, they're doing it really. So yeah, I think modern slavery certainly does exist, but I also think there is a different kind of slavery, which is unbelievably low-paid work that we're all very aware of and participating in, probably. I
think so. I had this debate with Cole Benjamin last week because he was saying he doesn't think anything's unfair. And we had a nice chat, but I was saying, like, look, some people are born in abject poverty, and he was just like, well, you know, they should make of it what they can. I was like, what do you mean, though? What could they possibly do? I got given everything. I know that winds people up when they're listening sometimes, but I think it's possible to say maybe there's not that much we can do. It's not the same as saying, oh, we need to make everything like equity. But I can still say, like, yeah, but I've also had a bit of a lucky ride here.
Totally. But then also we're living in a world where, you know, the 1% have siphoned off so much wealth from the rest of the world that is, you know, basic things that when we were growing up, you could assume that, you know, when you're an adult, you'll have a house and it will belong to you, and all of these other things become complete aspirations. And yeah, you know, I had a fortunate background growing up. But you think if you were someone who has come into a country with nothing, your chances of you being able to make anything are I mean, it's so stacked against you.
Did you go to a posh school?
I did go to a posh school, yeah.
What school?
I did my A-levels at Westminster School, which is a very posh school. It's about as posh as you can get. Well, it's not as posh as you could get. It's a very academic school. Mm-hmm. They only take the clever girls in at the sixth form in order to boost their exam results there.
Really?
And I was one of those.
You were the clever
girls.
one of the clever girls.
Yeah.
That's good. I was at a posh school as well. So people turn off now. It's too posh people talking.
Well, I was at a posh school, and then lots of posh people who went to my posh school, they all went to work in the city or they went into politics, and I haven't done that. So I feel like at least I haven't taken the easiest path, even though I was given a very easy journey to the start of that path.
But then you also look at a lot of those, because when I was in my early 20s, a lot of my old friends and schoolmates were doing that as well, and were exceedingly wealthy, and I was on minimum wage, and that was a bit. So you sort of tell yourself, well, I'm a bit different, and I've got a soul, and I'm interested in things, and it's like, yeah, but I can't pay for my heating this month, and they all can.
Yeah.
So they were doing all right.
Yeah. Self-respect is painful.
I suppose. I don't think they're bothered about not having I'm sure they're happy with what they're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a tough one. One of the clearest places that this idea of the price of life has manifested itself was COVID.
Yes.
What was going on there?
COVID was really interesting because COVID was a case where many political leaders said life is priceless and we will spend whatever it takes. That's what Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor, kept saying over and over again. we will do whatever it takes. We will do whatever it takes. Mayor of New York also said, life is priceless. We will spend anything to save lives. But the thing is, whatever it takes does have a price. There is a bill for it at the end, which is the bill of how much lockdowns cost. And I'm not an anti-lockdown person. However, from reporting this book and investigating it, I spoke to statisticians, mathematicians, people who had investigated this, and they had worked out that the cost of lockdown was equivalent to £180,000 per quality adjusted life year saved per person. So if you think about it in this terms, the NHS will spend £20,000 to £30,000 per year of life in good health that a treatment will give to you. But lockdown cost 6 times that much. So the government spent 6 times saving your and my life from COVID than it would saving your and my life from cancer or basically any other condition. And I don't think the government planned to do that. But it is interesting. It was a political decision to lock down. And that political decision means that resources that could have gone to solving poverty or buying more life-saving drugs for babies with terminal conditions, in fact, went on lockdown measures. And personally, like I said, I'm not anti-lockdown. I think given the chance, even given what we know now, I probably would stay at home again. And that's because, as I explained to you, I couldn't live with myself if I did something, if I killed my neighbour or I killed my mum because I gave them COVID. Mm-hmm. I couldn't live with myself. So I would definitely stay at home. But it wasn't, the measures that were taken were extremely expensive, and that money could have been spent in all manner of different ways.
So an effective altruist might, with reason, be anti-lockdown, or at least anti it lasting so long.
Yes, an effective altruist would say this is an ineffective way to spend money. But they also would say at the time we did not know, there's a lot that we didn't know about COVID, so probably on balance it was the right thing to do. And in fact, I interviewed the philosopher Peter Singer in my book, who is the grandfather of effective altruism. And I asked him about lockdowns, and he is still pro-lockdown, even though, he says, because this is how these people think. He said, the harm that lockdown caused to young people of not being able to go to school is much harder to quantify than the number of lives saved or the number of deaths that could have happened that didn't happen because of lockdown.
Interesting. But also we know, just anecdotally, I don't know if you know any teenagers, they're just fucked.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if that's because of other things. There's a lot of other stuff going on, in mental health and stuff like that. But like, every kid, and not that I know loads of kids, it's just that my half sister's 17, about to turn 17, so all of her friends at school, they just like decide when to go to school or not. I don't think I ever missed a day of school ever because my mum went berserk and she was like, get in the car, you get out, you're going. They all just like, nah, I'm not going to go for a couple of weeks, don't fancy it. And I feel like COVID, so that's one of the difficult times where it's like we can't really quantify it, but bloody hell, it seems to have screwed them up.
And also there's just going to be really long-term effects of all of that. Or the idea of I know lots of young people who are at university, for example, who never go to their lectures. They'll watch them online, which means they're not like chatting to people, going in and out of the lecture hall. And that's where like ideas come from. And that's where sparks fly. And there aren't many sparks, I think, nowadays.
No, but maybe this just sped up what was going to happen anyway with like VR and everybody at home doing their gaming and the Skype. I sound like an old person. All the Skype videos and the Zoom calls. Maybe it was going to happen anyway.
E-commerce, yes. No, maybe it was all going to happen anyway, but I do think there is a kind of magic that comes from human connection when human beings are in the same room together that we just can't recreate virtually.
I hated masks, and I think I became an anti-masker. I didn't give myself a name of that. And I spoke to my friend who's a lung doctor, and he said, well, you should probably wear a mask, but it's only going to help. It will help, but really on a nationwide scale, slightly. It's not going to do very much. And I was saying, but the social disadvantages, children growing up and just seeing a mask, you don't have any personality, you can't see people's expressions. Again, unquantifiable. But it drove me mad. And I thought, I wouldn't have minded it so much, but some people were so staunchly pro-mask that I felt like, why can't you consider that there were actually some negatives to it?
Well, it became a culture wars thing, didn't it? It became a whole, are you a conformist on the side of the government and vaccines, and it was a visible symbol of all of that. And, people got very cross about it. I mean, I didn't mind particularly wearing them. I hated having to put them on my children sometimes.
I wouldn't like that.
My little girl who was sucking her thumb was crying because she couldn't suck her thumb with a mask on. But, it was really messed up, desperate times. And for a lot of people, it was like, well, I'll do anything that might help. And if putting this on my face might help, then I'll do it.
The tribal stuff winds me up because you should be able, they always say, don't they, that like an interesting person is someone you can't tell what way they're going to go with a particular case. So I feel like lockdown maybe, vaccines definitely, I'm on board with that. That's going to lose a lot of viewers. And masks, no, did my head in.
Well, I'm really out of step with the times because I think you should be able to pick things on their individual merits, and you should be able to say, yes, I do believe in vaccines. I don't necessarily believe in this. And when it comes to trans issues, I don't mind sharing a toilet. When I go into a cubicle, I shut the door, so I don't necessarily mind. But trans women in sports, I might have a problem. But you can't do that nowadays. You have to pick a side. Hold the line. Yeah.
Got to hold the line. Let's move on to more controversial terrain. Israel recently has now invaded Gaza after Gaza attack. They're trying to get their hostages back. Is Israel doing more than is typical for a country in getting their hostages back?
Well, what's interesting is in looking at the price of life, I was looking at kidnap for ransom. So people who kidnap people purely for money. And when it comes to political prisoners, all the rules go out the window and you can't really study it like an economist would study it because it's not about money anymore. It's about the soul of a country, really, isn't it? I mean, I was looking at Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. It turns out that the UK paid an enormous amount of money to the Iranian government to secure her release. But the money was kind of irrelevant there. It was about Iran feeling like they had shamed the UK enough to get them to pay them. The money was a symbol, really, of the UK backing down. And I think with the Israeli hostages, it's got nothing to do with money at all. It's to do with, I think Hamas wants Israel to look like they have capitulated enough to give the hostages back. And it's about symbols, isn't it? It's about Israel showing itself to be weakened and diminished. And that will be a worthwhile bit of kidnapping for Hamas rather than anything to do with money. But the kind of trades that they're doing, it's something like 100 Hamas prisoners are being exchanged for every one Israeli hostage. So you could say that there is a kind of equivalence there. There is a kind of calculation there. But it's got nothing to do with money, really. It's just to do with winning a political argument.
It can be spun both ways because I suppose Hamas can say, look how desperate they are. They're giving us 100 for every one. Israel can say, look how much more we care about life, the price of life. We will pay any number of prisoners. We just want our people back.
Yes, or they could say, it takes 100 of their people to be worth one of ours. You can spin it, and I'm sure they are spinning it whichever way works for them.
Bloody hell. And so what kind of numbers are we typically talking? And do countries, when it is a monetary, like a kidnapping, a ransom thing, and do countries, like in the movies, say, we will not negotiate with terrorists?
Well, some countries do. So the US won't negotiate, the UK won't negotiate.
Like
ever, which actually makes
what was that
me
Iran
as
thing
a British citizen much more likely to be killed by a kidnapper. Because if I was being held hostage with some French people and some German people, Germany and France pay ransoms, the kidnappers could really get a much higher price for the German and the French hostage if they murdered me to show that they meant business.
Shit.
So it's actually not a very good idea for us not to be paying ransoms. We should be paying ransoms, really.
Oh,
the government should be paying ransoms if they want to keep us safe. If they want to keep us safe, there are many things that you can do to minimise our chances of getting taken hostage at all. And that's the way that you mitigate it, not by saying we will not negotiate.
Interesting. But I guess if you were with those people, you'd be like, hello, I'm Jenny.
Yes, exactly. Putting on my best French accent. Yes, absolutely.
For some reason, I speak in English when I do this.
Well, yeah, and this is the whole thing. So the American government and the UK government say, if kidnappers know that we pay ransoms, that means that our citizens will be targeted. But when kidnappers take people hostage, they generally don't know what nationality they are. It's not like I walk around foreign countries waving a Union Jack flag. You'd have to be quite unlucky for people to know your nationality if they stopped your car and pulled you out of it. So actually, I spoke to this amazing political economist who specialises in how to do kidnap negotiations, and she was saying, she's German. She was saying, I'm much safer. I couldn't.
I'm
do
much
her accent.
safer.
She has a very light German accent. She's been living here a long time, but yeah, she's quite an incredible person. She was saying that British people are far less safe because our government's stance is always that they won't negotiate. And the thing is, what that actually means is if your loved one is taken hostage and the UK government says we won't negotiate it with hostage takers, they know that you have to pay to get your loved one released. So they just leave it up to you and the insurance industry and experts that are involved in hostage negotiation. They leave you to do it, but they know you're going to do it anyway. They don't say, oh, please don't do it. They just say, oh, we can't be involved.
The numbers must be extortionate, though. So how much are you having to pay to get your person back?
The average ransom demand, I think, is around $370,000 per person. But these are the figures that are kind of bandied around by kidnap negotiators, and they're probably bullshit because kidnap negotiators don't want a going rate to be out there in the public domain so that kidnappers can say, oh, well, you're offering me 200,000, but that's much less than the average rate, so we want more. So it's probably plucked out at the end. Probably the real, it's probably more like 500,000.
Are people they must be selling their homes and things to get their family back?
Yes, but most people who are kidnapped have kidnap insurance. If you're going to a place where you could be kidnapped, so if you're going to do business in the Niger Delta, for example, or if you're going to Mexico and you're going into a dangerous area, then you're likely to have kidnap insurance or have taken it out. And if you have kidnap insurance, you can't really know how much you're insured for, because the more that you know, the more you invalidate your policy if you're kidnapped. And someone says, if you're kidnapped and then you say, oh, don't worry, I'm insured, then the price on your life massively goes up. So it's a very weird world where the less you know, the safer you are.
Interesting. I would, though, be saying, immediately, I've got insurance. Don't hurt me. You don't need to hurt me. Just talk to the insurance company. They don't care how many fingers you cut off.
Well, that means that you'd be kept hostage for a lot longer than you like, because they would feel like, okay, we can really screw a lot of money out of Andrew's insurance company.
So I'd have to pretend I don't have it and let my family organise it.
You have to pretend you don't have it and that your family has no money. Nothing at all, that your family is incredibly poor and you have no kidnap insurance and they've made a terrible mistake by keeping you hostage. That's the only way to get yourself out as quickly as possible.
Unless they're like, you know what, we have no use for you now.
98% of people who are kidnapped come out completely unharmed.
Wow.
And the 2% that aren't kidnapped, this is when there are professional hostage negotiators involved, the 2% who are harmed, they either have a previous medical condition or they've tried to escape.
Right, okay.
There are sort of rules that you need to play along with.
It's so rare that one is kidnapped, and I bet everyone, it's just the human thing, everyone's listening now, like really perking their ears up, like, okay, better remember that. When I get kidnapped, don't say this, do say that. Okay, that's really interesting. What's so special about the price of life in Afghanistan?
Afghanistan is the place where the cheapest and the most expensive lives on earth exist. So you can buy an Afghan child bride for around $500. And there are some villages in Afghanistan where it's difficult to find a child that hasn't already been sold, a girl that hasn't already been sold into marriage. And they're also the most expensive lives in the world because of the Taliban warlords that have been killed by the most expensive weapon in the world, which is the F-35 fighter jet. That program has cost something like $400 billion to date. It hasn't been used many times. It's been used several times in Afghanistan. And those lives would have been the most expensive lives ever taken.
What's so good about that jet?
I went to the factory where the jet was made and I didn't find it very impressive. But then again, I'm not really into cars and planes. It can avoid being detected by radar. It's very stealthy. The F-35B can take off vertically like a helicopter. It can just go up and down. It's quite amazing, really, apparently. And it's got lots of... the helmet that the pilots wear costs £500,000 and is like a VR headset that can map all the threats around them in real space and time. It's all very high tech, but I think it's an enormous waste of money because within a few years, we're not going to have pilots at all, are we? It's all just going to be drones.
Yeah.
How can you justify pilots being shot down when planes can fly themselves?
We're moving into a weird, weird world. What about your life when if you're killed by terrorists?
Well, that all depends on how you are killed and what country you come from. I looked at the London Bridge 2017 terrorist attack, where 8 people were killed. 2 people were killed by Islamic State terrorists who drove across London Bridge and killed them with a van. The terrorists then got out of the van and stabbed 6 other people. And these were 8 people who came from different countries. I think there were 3 French people, 2 Australian people, a British person, a Canadian person, and a Spanish person. And their families got vastly different amounts of money. And not just because of where they're from. So the Canadian family got, I think it's 11,000 Canadian dollars, which is something like £7,000 for the loss of their daughter. And the British person, his family would have got £11,000, which is statutory compensation. The Spanish person, his family got €250,000.
Wow.
However, the 2 people who were killed by the van on London Bridge, their families were able to sue Hertz, the company that the terrorists rented the van from.
Oh,
and
wow.
they got about £1.5 million each.
Shit.
So the people who killed them went on to stab other people seconds later, same people, same terrorists, seconds later, but they happened to kill these people with a knife instead of a van, and their families would have got a tiny fraction of the same amount.
Well, none of it makes up for losing your loved one, but...
No, but it's incredibly unfair and really stupid and a very bad system that needs to be rectified.
What have you learned writing this book? What really matters to elites and governments?
I think you don't want to have, I think real suffering comes from having the cheapest or the greatest or the most expensive number on your lives. You want to be somewhere in the middle, really. And most of us are somewhere in the middle. If the price of your life is very expensive, you're much more likely to get kidnapped. You're much more likely to be killed by lethal killing machines. If your life is very cheap, then it means that you are being exploited as a slave, basically, or that you're living in great poverty. I would say the key takeaway I found from writing this book is that prices are put on our lives all the time by businesses, by criminals, by judges, by governments, by health economists, by actuaries. That's how decisions are made all the time. And they benefit from the fact that we think it's a bit gross to put prices on lives and we don't really talk about it. And whilst we are saying, oh no, life is priceless, they are just merrily going along with their calculations, making choices about who gets to live and who dies, without us interrogating it very much. And I think we're moving into a world of AI-driven calculation where algorithms are going to be more and more involved in making these decisions. And, the prices that I've found out in reporting the book are quite general, but they're going to become more and more specific, more tailored to what actually is the value of your life. Is your life really worth saving? How much money are you going to be able to contribute with your taxes? How much good are you going to be able to do in the world? And it's about to become an even more powerful tool, the price of life. So we need to be able to have discussions about where these numbers come from and who is using them to make what decisions.
Your previous book, Sex, Robots and Vegan Meat, I've quoted it in my book, The Psychology of Secrets.
Fantastic.
The bit I quoted is about sex toys spying on us. Are we, and therefore, we don't really have secrets anymore. You can't even do anything in private. Are we moving towards the death of secrets as governments and companies and everything seems to be watching us and spying on us?
I don't think we're moving towards the death of corporate secrets, because when there's money to be made out of secrets, they'll be kept secret. But I do think we've moved towards the death of privacy, that we're prepared to give away so much data in order to have convenience, in order to have things tailor-made and specified just for us. And I think also, and yeah, I'm going to sound like an old fart here, but I think younger people care less and less about privacy and about the transaction of giving away data, personal data, in exchange for convenience. But yeah, I think when there's money to be made out of secrets, there will always be lawyers around trying to protect those secrets.
It's like in human history, we had this 100-year period of privacy, which was nice. And all before that, there weren't even corridors and hallways and houses, and families shared one bedroom. They would even, the parents would have sex in front of their kids. There was no concept of privacy. And then we had it finally for 50 to 100 years, and then we just gave it away again just to data companies.
One of the things that I've done is I present this Radio 4 series called The Gift, which is about the unintended consequences of taking DNA tests. And it's called The Gift because people give each other 23andMe and Ancestry tests.
Yeah, I've done that.
As a bit of fun. And secrets that people thought they were always going to get away with, fertility doctors using their own sperm, or people who have committed horrible crimes and then gone and started a new life as a fugitive and had a family and not told. All of this stuff that people thought was dead and buried is all just coming out now because people are prepared to give away the most intimate thing in the world, your genetic code, in exchange for a bit of, oh, look at this. See how I'm related to whoever.
95% Ashkenazi Jewish. 4%.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, 4% Baltic. No, 4% Iberian. That was surprising. And I always make the joke about having a Spanish milkman or something, who was tall or something. Have you kept an eye on sex robots in the intervening years?
I have a bit. They haven't come out yet. People seem to be having relationships with, like emotional relationships with AIs, with bits of software, but not actually having the physical sex with anything yet because it hasn't come out. There was always a lot of hype in the world of sex robots, and I'm sure they will come onto the market one day. But the problem is science fiction has made us all think, oh, this thing will walk up to my door, knock on the door, and I'll allow it in, like Kelly LeBrock in Weird Science or whatever. And we're quite far away from that still.
Okay. It is a weird thought because you don't actually imagine that sex robot looking and feeling really like a human. But I guess if it was done right, it would do.
Yes. And it would really need to feel like a human. You're going to be touching it a lot. So there is a lot that you can get wrong.
Not me, but one.
You'd hope.
Yes.
But, there's a lot that you can get wrong in that experience. And I think it's going to take a long time for people to get it right.
Where can people get your book? I'm going to put it up to the camera.
Yes. The Price of Life, In Search of What We're Worth and Who Decides. You can get it anywhere. You can get it all in good bookshops. You can probably get it in bad bookshops too. But you can get it everywhere. And please do get it.
Yes. The Price of Life, In Search of What We're Worth and Who Decides. Who's a heretic you admire?
Well, I admire Simon Wood, who is a maths professor from the University of Edinburgh, who is mentioned in that book. And he is somebody that worked out that lockdowns were incredibly expensive. He also wrote a paper about why they might not have been necessary, that nobody would publish, and he kept trying to get it published. And he's not anti-vax and he's not a climate change denier. He just follows the data wherever it takes him. And I think it probably wasn't great for his career, but I think he's a great guy for continuing to try and stand up for his work.
That's a fascinating heretic. People, please go and get Jenny's book. I've got holding it again. Look, that's how much I want you to get it. The Price of Life, In Search of What We're Worth and Who Decides. Go and get it because we write these books, we work on them, and Jenny's really, really good. And I loved her last book as well. These are just do the thing and put in the comments if you're going to get it because I'm always intrigued. And hit the like button. Keep watching this channel. I'll put a thing next to my finger here so you can keep watching this channel.